I am so excited for today because it marks the first Like a Girl speaker in our Like a Girl speaker series. So, just so you know, Like a Girl is a new endeavor for us, and it's rooted really in our mission. The series is designed to introduce you all um, to strong and passionate women from all walks of life. Um, I remember as a young kid, if I were to see someone who looked like me in spaces that I didn't know I could exist in, I think my journey might have been a little different. And so wanted to provide you that opportunity. You will see women who are role models in our community, both locally, nationally, and globally. And you get to learn from them, from how they forged their paths, from being told no and kept it pushing, or I've just led a life that serves the function of freeing someone else. So without further ado, I hand it over to Annika to introduce our first speaker.
Hi, Eldad. Hi again, I guess. Happy Monday. We are so excited to welcome our first guest, Leilani Lewis. She is a social justice leader and higher education administrator. Okay. She is a graduate of Seattle University and Leadership Tomorrow, which is a local program that helps people become better leaders and speak up and make change in their communities. She's used this experience to become one of the founding staff members at the Northwest African American Museum, which is near our school. Currently, she works at UW as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Advancement. She collaborates with many UW organizations to develop anti-racism, justice, and equity strategies for their businesses. She has won the City of Seattle Mayor's Arts Award for her passionate work to keep art in Seattle alive. I'm so honored to welcome this amazing Renaissance woman, Leilani Lewis, to our school. Leilani, take it away.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Connor. Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be the first speaker here for Like a Girl. And I hope my story today, while short, inspires you and gives you some insights as to what it means to have your own journey and to find your strength. So, why don't I get started? I had a lot of great time reflecting on my middle school experience. So I'll share with you a few things about that and what it means to move forward and find your strength as a leader. So I, like you, once went through middle school. I went through middle school in Michigan. I was in Farmington Hills, Michigan, which is a small, not so small suburb of Detroit. I was in school. I was the only Black child there. I was actually one of two. And back then, people called me Lonnie. And there was a young boy in my school, and he was the only other Black child in my school, and his name was Lonnie. So I was not, I felt much like an outsider all that time during my middle school years. In fact, having both of us have the same name not only didn't help, but being the only African American children in the school was difficult at the time. You have to remember, this is many, many years ago, before much of our social justice language was developed the way that it is now, and before, before our understanding of what it means to belong and to be part of something, before all of that was really, really developed in the schools there in Michigan at the time in the 90s, many, many years ago. Some of us on the call might remember those decades. So I share that with you because it has a lot to do with my story of often feeling like an outsider and then coming to understand myself and my identity and what strength that gave me going forward. So being not only the only African American child in middle school, I was often the only African American child among family members. my mother my mother is a British white person, and I have two older siblings who are also identify as white. So my world, and while I spent a lot of time with people who did look like me, the intention of my mother, I was often misunderstood by family members, and so in my experience, often being maybe teased or maybe considered an outsider or not feeling like I belonged in school, shaped my thinking and my values around justice, around equity, around making sure that the people around me and the people I engaged with felt as though they feel as though they belong always. So that is where a lot of the root of my story comes from, is understanding that outsider feeling. Well, to add to that, I just have one, if I can share screen, I have one picture that I know encapsulates my awkward middle school years that I want to share with you. This encaptures, I hope it makes me laugh now. Then I hope, at that time, I was very awkward. I was told to jump in a photo. I was taking dance classes. I loved to dance and I loved art. I loved to express myself at that age. So I I want to share this because I haven't found a worse dance photo from middle school that I could share. And um, showing how maybe awkward I was and uncomfortable in my skin I was at that time. But I just wanted you to know that that's really the part of that. I grew up feeling very awkward outside and in a different space than many of my peers. Well, something about being in feeling on the outside um, gave me a little bit of not only my values, but gave me a little bit of strength in understanding that I could probably do a lot more than people who had maybe more constraints than I did. Not to saying that, not feeling like you belong is a good thing. It's not. Always, we want to feel we belong, we are connected. So I found ways that I might get connected, and this happened a little bit later in life for me. So when I was a young adult in transitioning from middle school to high school, I hid myself in high school. I was, finding my identity and looking for ways to express myself, and I wrote. I wrote poetry. I heard that there's a poetry night coming up that's quite popular. I wrote poetry. I choreographed dances. I thought I was going to be Paula Abdul. Maybe some of you know who that is, and some of you don't. She was a famous person way, way, way back in the day. Um, so I danced. I wrote my deepest feelings and poured that into poetry. Um, I actually started my own little poetry club. I found ways to connect with others, and I had the sense that I wanted to explore music, though I was not terribly talented. I still explored it. I felt as though I didn't have much to lose by continuing to find ways to express my feelings and express myself throughout starting in middle school, when I was put into this awkward situation of being the outsider, not being very popular, um, and and just creating a world for myself where I did belong. And that carried and stayed with me through high school. And I believe that is often also a basis of my strengths. So my curiosity stayed strong during those years. Um, but it was a very difficult time. And those challenges were helped or soothed by continuing to write and be present and understand that, I will get through this and I will move forward and persevere. There are also a lot of challenges with being a young person in a society that maybe not understand you, having some being racially ambiguous or having some other outsider identities. things that people don't understand. I faced rejection. So even in that dance photo, I remember my dance teacher telling somebody saying that I wasn't a good dancer, and I heard this adult saying this, and that was really crushing for me at the time. But I continued to move forward and move on. But I remember going through that hurt, one of the initial first times I experienced something like that. Um, I I experienced some rejection in school and difficulty with teachers. I remember, um, though, keeping my eye on the present and making sure that I continued to write down everything I was experiencing and feeling. I still have those notebooks today. They're painful to read because they're not written very well, but they were important to me at the time and carried me through. So that's one of the many things that helped during those times, during those years. There are not many people who go through life that don't at one time or another feel as though they don't belong. Even the most, celebrated people in our communities often have stories that are painful, that have or difficulty or rejection at one time or another. So I want you to remember that as you move forward in your journey. And many of you are in varying grades in middle school, maybe eighth grade or getting close to high school. It's all part of that path, and you'll encounter difficulty along the way. And this is something that you can get through, especially, well, for me, it was art or whatever your interests are can carry you through those times. Well, after high school, I went to, I took some time off and I went to community college. I didn't have many, I didn't have the aspirations that a lot of my peers had. I took another route. I took a non-traditional route, and I went to community college, and it was there that I discovered art history. So art history for me was an exciting field. I went to all the classes that I could. I took everything that I could, and I explored especially African American artists who had shaped sort of my world and given me some visual healing uh, during some painful moments. So I lobbed onto artists like Jacob Lawrence, whose work is all around Seattle. In fact, Jacob Lawrence taught at the University of Washington, and this is early on in my college years. And I wrote papers on artists like Carrie Mae Weems was practicing, and other artists I hope you'll look up the names of and see their work. Um, uh, and that is how, in college, that's where I found my path. So loving art history does not make you um, land a wonderful, lucrative job when you get older. Um, so luckily, because of my interest, and especially in a specific African American art, I got involved in a project called the Northwest African American Museum. It's close to the middle school, and it is housed in the Coleman Elementary School, historic building over there on Massachusetts Street. Um, I got involved right before the museum opened. In fact, a few months before the museum opened in that building, and it was a dream job. However, all of those old feelings of being an outsider and not knowing anything and feeling insecure, all of that came up because I was very green at this work. I didn't have museum experience. I had been doing odd jobs and other sorts of work before I got hired, and I was going through school. So I felt like I was at the bottom of the rung, and I really was. I really didn't know a lot, and I had to learn, and I had to catch up, and I had to study how to actually work in an environment that was fast paced, and it's a small organization, and doing something that was so important to the community, which is important to me. So I stuck in there, and I met somebody really amazing. I met somebody who was actually taught by one of the artists I admire. Her name is Barbara Earl Thomas, And she was the director, or becoming the director, she's a curator at the time, becoming the director of the museum. So imagine my eyes are wide. I'm like, you are taught by Jacob Lawrence? Like I've studied, that was the person who got me inspired to study art history and get my degree from the university in art history. And that was incredible. So I feel like that was really serendipitous that I got to meet Barbara L. Thomas. So, but that wasn't the end of it. That was sort of the beginning. Barbara went on to lead the organization. And not only that, she took me under her wing and mentored me and taught me some things I want to share, taught me some really important lessons as I went on to engage with the community that I want to share with you now. So when Barbara was leading, I was working in all kinds of different jobs. When you work in a small organization, you have lots of different jobs you do. I was a volunteer manager and programs. I did educational programs. I did story times. I led lots of tours to school groups, probably Washington Middle Middle school groups. Many tours. So I had to learn all about the history. I had to learn all about Seattle's Black history and art history as well. So that was all woven in. And what Barbara taught me in working with all kinds of people, making sure that they have space that's, tell their stories, dance, share their poetry. That's what we were doing at the museum. And when you're working with all kinds of people, one of the things she always said was to have grace and have patience. The thing is, when we're in environments with all different types of people, sometimes we don't choose our coworkers, and we often don't choose our classmates. It's easy to have your own set of values and your own way of doing things that are not aligned with the people you're around. They might have their own set of values and their own ways of doing things. And she taught me the art of connection. You must stay connected. It might be different than what you believe, it might be different than your approach, but the way that she taught me how to stay connected and to meet people where they are, to meet and try to find common ground, to let people make mistakes. You imagine when you're producing lots of different, you might have clubs or like have events. A number of things can go wrong, and you can get upset about a number of different things. She always kept an even keel and said, everybody's going to make mistakes, or we're going to need grace, and we're going to have to give grace. So she taught me that, and that, I believe, that single lesson helped me produce larger, more exciting programs that ended up getting covered by the Seattle Times. I ended up getting news coverage for some of the work we were doing. And I was a part of something really special. But in order to be a part of something really special, I had to, again, remember that I bring my personal values of, making sure that people have space, they feel they belong, but to practice and express that all of the time, that's the challenging part. You might hold those values, but you have to practice and stay connected with others and show grace. So I share that with you because it was that lesson that really helped me build a successful program that started to get a lot of coverage, and it just actually by accident. It was sort of not terribly intended, because I was trying to do something good for the community, and we were trying to do some good in the community, and we also had a way of working with partners that made people feel connected, engaged, and like they belong. So you can build so much more when you take that approach to your work, or if you're a student, or if you're working even on a group project. It makes all the difference when you keep people scooped in and connected with grace and understanding. So with that, I thought, I was the first person in my whole family to go to school, to go to college. And I was also the first one I decided I could maybe get my master's degree. Um, and being, like I said, always an outsider. So I thought, why not? So I decided I would go back to Seattle University and get a degree in leadership, learn how to lead, learn what it means to be a great leader in the eyes of that school, and take some of the great lessons that I've learned from mentors. And I went back to school. And then working at the museum was so rewarding and amazing. And I got to meet all kinds of people in all walks of life, in the community and nationally, that I was able to do even more. That that for some reason somebody nominated me for a Mayor's Arts Award, which is extremely, can you imagine? I mean, I'm coming from where I come from, and being, again, the only person to go in this family to go to college, being an outsider my whole life, and saying, for having the community award me, saying that I deserve something before the work that I've done because of the ways that I've showed up for the community, was extremely, extremely humbling and wonderful at the time. But I also I credit that experience that I had as an outsider to bring me that strength, and also the mentorship of Barbara Old Thomas to give me that insight into and reflection of myself, um, in order to do the work that I did, that sparked something in somebody else to say, hey, let's give her an award. So that was pretty special at the time. And as my work at the museum sort of, it came time to move on to the University of Washington, I carry these lessons with me in the current role that I have. I work with people who are staff members at the University of Washington, but I bring them together. I bring people together. I build community, make sure that they know that they belong, and that it's understanding that if people feel like they're outsiders, they do belong somewhere to someone, um, and to do their best work, they have to stay connected, give grace, and understanding, meet people where they are, and also assume that most people are doing the best that they can from where they are. And that's extremely important lesson that I brought with me to my current role. Not everybody is going to be perfect all the time. Not everybody is going to give grace the way that you will, but you can. Your choices are yours, and we all deserve it at some point in time or another to have grace for our mistakes, and to move forward and thrive with others. You have to stay connected and give grace as well. So that is something that I take with me to my current role, as director, and understanding that I also push against the status quo. I push against the current definitions of what it means to, be a staff member, be a Black person in these professional roles as an executive. Uh, I push against the notion that there's only one right way to do something, and that strength I get from having had so many outsider experiences. You have to, you have to push for what's, for justice. And you have to, and oftentimes it goes against the grain. It might not even be a popular notion, but if you know it's right, and you know that if anybody's being harmed, by the actions of a group or organization, that you can be the lone voice to stand up and say, no, that's not right. Somebody needs to look out, and somebody needs to advocate. And I do that often as I can. Um, and I have to, again, I'm an outsider. I have the freedom to do that. So I've given myself that, and I've thrived, I think, because of that. So I've given some things here. I think I'm at time, if not a little over. So I want to give a moment to answer any questions. Can somebody give me a time check?
Yeah, thank you so much, Leilani. That was so great to hear your story. Yeah,
for LW students in their classrooms. We know that the bell just rang, but we're going to hang tight just a couple more minutes because it would be great to get some Q&A time. So if you have questions for Leilani, you can ask your teacher to type them in the chat, or I think that might be the easiest way. And then maybe Annika can read the questions out loud. So if you have some questions, I'll give you a moment to type them in the chat since I can't see everyone's faces right now.
I have a question. Whoa. Oh, sorry. You're good. You're good. You're good. Okay. Sorry about that. I have a question before chats start coming in. How do you, in your job at UW, how do you encourage people to use anti-racism policies and things like that? And how do you make them feel like they are not an outsider to you?
Yes. Well, like in my practice, I create community where people can feel safe and open and expressing themselves. That's the first part of that work. And also education. I do produce a lot of education, sort of program and initiative so that it is well understood what anti-racism is and what it looks like and how it can manifest both interpersonally, systemically, and institutionally. Unfortunately, women, a large university system that's been around for 150 years, anti-racism's existence within the university might be micro, pockets, but it might also take hold. And I have to keep that perspective as well, that I'm not going to be the one to shift the 150-year institution, but who knows, I might be seeding something for the next 2 generations to do that. So that's where I keep my perspective. So there's a few, so education and also creating spaces, especially for BIPOC and gender diverse folks to be part of.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Dr. Connor. She says, your statement that you have to push for justice sits with me. How do you know when to push and when to ride it out or pull?
That's a great question. Sometimes you don't know. It's situational. Sometimes you push and you should have pulled and you've made a mistake and oh my gosh, what do? You forgive yourself, you move forward, you adjust, you ask questions, you stay curious. That's how I know. Sometimes I work with, again, high level executive leadership, people who report to the president of the university. That is sometimes you have to pull and work with them in different ways. Knowledge of people, knowledge of groups, knowledge of where they are, knowledge of what they respond to is all very, very important. Staying curious about what groups you're working with, and also what their situations and scenarios are that they're dealing with, can help you understand when to push, when to pull, and when to write it out. It might not be the right time. It might not for one thing or another. It might be that you keep something very present and an emergent thing or issue or something that might solve for a number of things. You might keep those very present. So being attuned to others, staying connected, again, extremely important skills to have in this role, to know.
That's awesome. And then we have another question. How did you find out about the Northwest African American Museum in Seattle?
You know what I did? I wanted a museum. I wanted to work in a museum, and the Seattle Art Museum was like a ivory vault that you could not get into as a bachelor's degree in art history. So I called around and I found somebody, Brian Carter, who had graduated from the museology. So I called the museology department at the University of Washington and said, hey, I don't know, I want to work for an African American museum. I heard there's a project somewhere, something's happening, but it was very, very lucky. But I did call, I was persistent in calling around.
Well, Leilani, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for your story, for your words, for your kindness and grace with our students. And just want to say we appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for hearing my story. I encourage you all to tell your stories and keep going, keep moving.